Good evening. I'm Scott Burton. Tonight on Writer Showcase, our writers and actors explore the theme of journeys. We'll defy death on Mars, explore wanderlust on the sea, follow a compass to false expectations, and skiff ride to new horizons. Watch as our writers and actors take prose to new places right here on Writer Showcase. In this excerpt from his book, Hidden Falls, writer Kevin Myers uses a compass to illuminate a father-son relationship and the fragility of expectations. Reading Kevin Myers' The Brass Compass, please welcome Clint Farr.
When I was 12, my father brought me camping in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. The great promise of the trip was a visit to Hidden Falls. The brochure described it as a swimming hole constructed by Earth's natural forces and concealed from its human inhabitants. It is a hidden oasis carved by waterfalls into the landscape of the White Mountains. It sounded magical. As we departed New Bedford, Massachusetts, I imagined standing beneath the cascading water. I pictured it as being turquoise and feeling tropical as it washed over me. I'm sure my vision was inspired by the movie Blue Lagoon, as my pubescent mind populated the scene with half-naked girls that all looked like a teenaged Brooke Shields, their bodies glistening in the sun as they beckoned me like sirens at the water's edge. Well, my fantasy, was interrupted by a stop at a rest area. And even though I had to pee, there was a burgeoning reason to stay seated. So I opened the Rand McNally across my lap and convinced my father I could wait. I'll see how far we have left to go, as I told him as I fidgeted in my seat and thumbed through the map. We camped in the National Forest off the Cucamonga Highway. The campground was beyond a covered bridge with a red tin roof that was supported by giant crisscrossed timbers. The water that flowed beneath the bridge carried the tannins of decomposed foliage that gave it the color of weak tea. The air felt clean, like after a heavy rain, and the entire state smelled like my grandmother's embroidered pine needle pillow. We camped like British explorers, which is to say, not lightly. It took our combined strength to remove the canvas tent from the way back of the country squire. The tent was 8 feet tall and supported by wooden poles. It had 3 compartments, a bedroom for each of us, divided by a living room. It took the better part of an hour to set it up. We had a 6-burner Coleman stove and a metal ice chest that, when loaded, was so heavy that it could only be moved in a succession of short bursts. We slept on an Army surplus cots that probably weighed 30 pounds each, but they needed to be sturdy to hold our musty wool insulated sleeping bags that were heavy enough to smother you during the night. But the moment that is important to this story came the morning after we arrived, the long-awaited trip to Hidden Falls. As we got in the car, my father placed on the seat between us a canteen, a basketball ref's whistle, a small box wrapped in butcher block paper. The wrapping was held to the box with twine. It looked like something out of the past. In our relationship, my father always spoke first. If I wanted you to know what was in the box, I knew he'd say, I'd have told you. So I waited and wondered. My imagination went wild trying to concoct a situation in which a canteen, a whistle, something the size of 2 stacked decks of playing cards would become necessities. A competitive Jim Rummy marathon is as close as I got. After about 30 minutes of winding down through narrow back roads, we turned up an even narrower dirt road. The country squire wasn't really made for country driving. As we bounced so vigorously over the swells and potholes, we joked about putting on our seatbelts. We came to a stop where the road widened enough for my father to make a 3-point turn. He shifted the car into park. His face became so serious that it frightened me. It was the look of urgency reserved for illness, divorces, and death. My heart skipped as he reached across me and opened the door. "Straight out there, Michael, is your future." And he handed me a canteen, and I almost myself. Is he sending me off into the woods to survive on my own? "Dad," I started. I need to talk some sense to him. "Listen," he said as his eyes softened a bit. He placed the box on my lap. "The water you need to survive, but in this box is the most important thing I'll ever give you. It's the most important thing a father can give any son. More than money or the keys to the family business, it's direction. The swimming hole is about a mile due north. Follow the needle, and I'll be waiting there for you." And with that, he pushed me out of the car and only drove a few yards before slamming on the brakes. The car slid to a halt on the rocky dirt road. I thought this is where he'd say, "Just kidding," but instead he's tossed the whistle to me and shouted, "And if you get lost, blow this every few minutes until someone finds you." And he drove off again. The whistle was attached to a hockey lace that my father had balled in his hand. He had a good throwing arm, but the whistle didn't reach me. Lace uncoiled and fluttered behind the hard plastic casing like a vapor trail of a sputtering plane. I didn't move to catch it. I just watched it hit the ground, bounce as the car bounced and bobbed away from me. I was dumbfounded. I stood by the side of the road like an expectant dog tied to a pole waiting for its owner to return. Anger slowly burned away my disbelief. I wanted to get to the swimming hole so I could yell at my father, maybe even punch him. The package was sweat-stained before I got around to opening it. It took me a few minutes to untie the string and clear away the paper. The compass looked like a pocket watch, and on the lid was engraved, "Always move toward your goals." "Okay, I get it," I said aloud. "It's good to have a goal. You can come back and get me now." After a few minutes, I decided there was no sense in waiting around. It's only a mile, I thought. I can beat him there. I can run a mile in under 10 minutes. That'll show him. When he gets there, my hair will be wet. I'll be relaxing on the rocks, spinning the compass on the chain, and the whistle will be at the bottom of the lake. I popped open the compass's lid and used the red needle to get my bearing. The forest was second growth, so there was lots of shrubs and ground cover to be gotten around. There was an outcropping of rocks due north, about 400 yards at the top of a bluff. I'd work my way there as quickly as possible, find my bearing again, and then set the next mark. I'd just keep doing this until I got to the secret swimming hole. The first stretch was pretty easy. Deer trails crisscrossed the hillside, and I was able to scamper to the outcropping in a matter of minutes. And the rocks were surrounded by blueberries. I could have lived off for days. Down the other side of the bluff was a shallow ravine with a gently running stream. There was an eddy just a few degrees east of north. It was the widest crossing point, but the most obvious landmark. Thick brush made it slow going. I was so determined to get there quickly that I didn't even consider the possibility of poison sumac or ivy until I was 100 yards down the slope, and the thought made me itchy. I scratched that concern from my head by imagining my father's face when he saw me standing at the swimming hole waiting for him. His brow would furrow, and his head would cock slightly to one side, and the corner of his tightly clenched lip would bend upward until it formed a dimple. "How the hell did you get here so fast?" he'd ask. I worked my way to the eddy and followed a path that ran parallel to the water while looking for a shallow or rocky crossing. The path brought me far off course, which made me nervous, but I was also becoming curious by the increasing force of the water. The calming jabber, the gentle turns and sways were being overcome by the sound of powerful rapids further downstream. Mist filled the air, and rays of sun flowed through the evergreen canopy, illuminating patches of wildflowers along the ravine. Dots of purple, white, and yellow flashed brilliantly through the endless palettes of greens and browns. The forest was suddenly a kaleidoscope of sensation. Scents of lavender and pine, the chill from the mist and the warmth from the sun, light sparkle and refracted from infinite drops of morning dew. The forest seemed to exhale and stretch itself awake. I've gone too far east, I thought, as I turned around from the sun and headed back toward the eddy, running twice as fast to make up for lost time. I swam across the stream, holding the compass above the water and floating the canteen between my neck and shoulder. The opposite shore was rocky and steep, but it was an easy climb, like a staircase. It was also a perfect hiding place for water snakes, my favorite thing in the world. I scurried up the cliff. It seemed higher when looking down from the top than it did while looking up from the bottom. I got goosebumps as the breeze took hold of my soaked cotton shirt and cut-off jeans. I moved out from the shadows of the birch trees that lined the cliff, and to the north stretched an open field. Bugs and butterflies hovered just above the bending stalks of wheatgrass. Sunlight hit the field at such an extreme angle that when I looked to the east, all I could discern were the silhouettes of grass interrupting the light. I looked for a landmark at the north end of the field, but nothing stood out against the wall of pines. I reached for the compass as I moved to find a better vantage point. Before I could identify what was rustling by my foot, it became a high-pitched screeching and a blur of feathers by my head. I had stepped on a pheasant hole, and it was letting me know that visitors were not welcome. I was 5 yards north before I confirmed that it was a pheasant, not phantom, that had scared my testes into my stomach. I ran at a pace fueled by a surge of adrenaline that could not be sustained for very long. There was a giant oak 200 yards away, but it was too far to my east to be a landmark. I was determined to maintain my pace until I crossed its long shadow. The shadow, I thought, goes east-west. If I cross the shadow perpendicular, I'll be heading north. I concentrated on the area immediately before me, searching for anything that might trip me up. I was making great time, and as I neared the oak shadow, my approach was slightly cattywampus, and I adjusted my course a bit to the east. I slowed as I crossed the shadow to check my logic against the compass. The needle pointed north, but it occurred to me, for the first time on my journey, that without a map, and unless my father had exactly calculated my departure point, which I was very certain he had not, I was more or less flying blind. I was overtaken with doubt and fear. What the hell, I thought as I slowed to a walk. All the vigor had drained out of me. I stopped in the middle of the field and looked in every direction for something man-made, somewhere to walk, where another human being might be able to help me find my way. A road, a building, something, anything, but I saw nothing. I contemplated turning back. I knew I could find the Forest Service road again, and that would lead me back to the highway. It would take half a day, but I'd be safe, easy to find. It was probably closer to the swimming pool. I was probably closer to the swimming pool, but I had no real way of knowing if I was on track. No point on the compass felt like a great option. So I decided to follow the needle north. What a jerk, I thought about my father, leaving me out here to die. I was no longer concerned about getting there first. I was just concerned with getting there alive. I scanned the horizon about 90 degrees from north, hoping to find some sign that I was heading the right way. I kept the compass open and followed the needle diligently toward the wall of pines. As I approached the trees, maybe 200 yards away, I noticed a road just inside the tree line. I shut the compass and broke into a sprint. Within 15 seconds, I had covered half the ground to the road. The compass was clammy against my palm, and the whistle, which had strung around my neck, was bouncing off my chest, then cheek, chest, then chin, chest, then eye, until I batted it like a tetherball around my neck. Slightly to the west, through the trees, I saw the outline of a trail sign. I pushed my fatigue from my consciousness, and I focused on that sign like a hungry lion focuses on its prey. And as I got close, I slowed. Greedily sucked in air like it was the last on earth. Hidden Falls, Point 3, read the yellow lettering carved in the brown sign with an arrow pointing to a footpath. I sipped from the canteen and caught my breath as I walked in the direction of the arrow. My wet shirt was pasted to my skin, and a drop of sweat fell into my eye, and I ignored the stinging as I was focused on covering the last 3/10 of a mile as quickly as possible. Confident in the direction, I ran as fast as I could without losing my breath. My thoughts again drifted to imagining my father's face when he saw me climbing out of the majestic waters, surrounded by glistening brook shields lookalikes. The forest canopy opened before me. This must be it, I thought, as I slowed to savor the moment. The path took a right angle and followed a rocky face that had been excavated to make room for a parking lot. and as I stood at the pass elbow, looking across an expanse of asphalt, to find the empty promise of marketing brochures. What? I muttered. I desperately surveyed the area looking for something redeeming, but found nothing. The site was a man-made monstrosity, posing its hideousness onto the natural world. The falls was a concrete ledge that was fed by a 12-inch corrugated steel pipe. The pool into which the water dripped was also constructed of poured concrete with a spill drain downriver to ensure the water level would always be sufficient for swimming and probably most often stagnant. The picnic tables were all missing slats. The swing sets had no swings, and the bottom third of the lone 55-gallon steel trash can was covered in overflowed refuse. And tucked off in the far end of the parking lot was a 73 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme with all the glass smashed out and resting on cinder blocks. The recession took its toll on many areas of American life, but this place seems to have been singled out for aggressive neglect. Hidden Falls wasn't hidden, it had been abandoned. I walked to the end of the path, sat on the curb, sighed, and waited for my father. The sun rose above the trees and warmed the goosebumps from my arms and legs. The heat bugs screeched as the humidity increased, but still no sign of the country squire. I looked at the engraving on the compass one more time. Always move toward your goals, and pass the time by thinking of more befitting alternatives. Think things through. Have a better plan. Bring a map. I didn't think of anything as motivating or life-affirming as the saying on the compass, but my phrases seemed more practical. Having a goal is important, and moving toward it is important, but the journey is also important. Missing from the lesson on the compass was how to reach your goals without feeling lost and alone and like you're going to die. The sun was high above the trees by the time my father arrived, and the look on his face, nothing like I'd imagined. It was filled with fear and loss. The car screeched to a stop. My father jumped out and hugged me. I can't remember a time when he held me like that, either before or after that moment. As relief washed over us both, I thought of things I might say to him, but before I could, he kissed me on my head and told me that he loved me. These were not words that came easily to my father, and he wiped a tear from his cheek, and then he said them. Let's start over today. And we got in the car. I never questioned my father's judgment in trying to teach me what he thought was an important lesson. The thing I remember most about the day was the great time we had after leaving Hidden Falls. We went fishing near the covered bridge, laughed all afternoon telling stories about screeching pheasants and concrete waterfalls, and didn't catch a thing. Thank you.
In this next piece, set on Mars, writer Bobbi McCutcheon places our young protagonist in instant peril when his vehicle breaks down. In what may be the boy's first brush with death, we get a unique look into the fearlessness young age allows. Reading McCutcheon's The Broken Journey, please welcome Roblin Gray-Davis.
The brittle Martian regolith broke softly underfoot as he jogged. The lonesome sound reverberated through his space boots, up his legs, into his torso, and then seemed to echo to a stop inside the clear dome of his pressurized helmet. At his knee trotted his dog, Dove, in her 4-footed survival suit with its clear bubble helmet and twin oxygen-filled side packs. Her attention pointed straight ahead, doggedly enough, and her head bobbed up and down and jiggled slightly to the right with her every other step. Mouth hanging open in a grin, her tongue lolled in happy dog-like oblivion to the perilous circumstance she shared with her master. He tried to pace his gait while he perpetually gazed across the near curve of his birth planet's horizon, looking for it. But there was nothing, no sign of it. His lips pursed into a frown as he squinted ahead, straining to spot it. But as far as the eye could see, Only scattered stones of wild dimensions interrupted the easy swells of Mars's oxidizing dunes of wind-borne dust. Nowhere rose the modest sign of civilization he was expecting to find. More forcefully now, and from the new direction of south-southeast, the breeze pushed at his thin body from afore as if to check his onward progress. Slowing with fatigue, he dropped into a hurried walk, and his posture sagged in a brief mental moment of defeat. If caught in the open with no other protection than a pressure suit, wind here meant death. Tendrils of powdery sand would worry themselves into vulnerable crevices on his suit, resulting in serious malfunction. Nervousness cleaved lines between his dark brows. Night was rapidly descending. Too tired to take another step, he stopped to catch his breath and watch Mars's dull ochre colors fade to dusky grays in the diminishing light of the evening. As he inhaled deeply and rapidly, he realized, for maybe the first time in his life, that though surrounded by the vastness of the alien outdoors, he could only smell the metallic air from his tank pack. Why had he not wondered about the smell of Mars before? What was her peculiar odor? He realized he would never learn that answer. Looking down, he noticed Dove staring him in the eyes. When his gaze met hers, she barked once, as if in question. Though he saw her jaws move, and he knew that she had barked, he could not hear the sound. He checked his suit's wrist console readouts. Less than an hour of oxygen remained, slightly more than that for poor little Dove. Frowning deeply, he looked around very carefully now that he was standing still. Except for the loneliness of scattered, isolated rock formations, the dry landscape was empty. His compass told him he was headed in the right direction, but on foot like this, he couldn't tell how far ahead his destination lay. Without being the usual 10 feet above them, the landmarks all looked different. Whatever roads or tracks that tried to form out here were casually erased, completely dusted over each day by whorls of nomadic sand. Cursing, he turned and glanced back. In the distance, sail dutifully furled, the gaunt aluminum mast of his wrecked windjammer jutted conspicuously from the night-shaded surface like a lone dead timber. Turning away from the miserable sight of his broken transport, he trotted into a full run. It took only moments this time for his chest to start to burn, and it was only moments longer before his sides began to ache. His body was not accustomed to endurance running. Being born on this planet, he didn't have the natural earth-born musculature as the immigrants enjoyed. He was small, thin-boned, and flat of muscle. With each jarring step, his tired legs threatened collapse. Yet, as night continued to deepen, a certain resolution began to harden in his spirit. That old customary stubbornness that seemed to lose for him the best of arguments was coming to his rescue. He wasn't going to die out here, he suddenly vowed to the brightening stars. He hadn't lived this long to be killed by something as trivial as a broken axle. The minutes thumped past, keeping time with lonely footfalls that spoke the rhythm of his desperate dash for life. He kept telling himself that he was almost there, almost there. Then suddenly, through the world's invisible screen of rarefied atmosphere, the landmark nudged against the starry backdrop of space. There, sentinel to Tharsis Chasma, was the ensign, snapping in the ever-present Martian breeze. In the night, the flag's typically brilliant colors were suffused, yet seemed to glow eerily as if bathed in black lighting. Fighting exhaustion and the quivering in his legs, he pressed on, this time wearing a smile. Soon, the gaping black canyon drew into ever-sharpening focus. He checked his oxygen. 2 minutes. The elevator down would take 8. There was no time for it. Without breaking stride, he snatched Dove out of her awkward suit trot, raced for the ragged lip of the escarpment, and jumped. Free-falling in the near vacuum, he jammed a surprised Dove between his knees and dropped along the cathedral cliffs, arms wide, reaching terminal velocity within seconds. Wind whipped at his suit, pressing it uncomfortably into places where it wasn't meant to dwell. The bottom was impossible to see. Unblinking, he stared at the black abyss below and counted silently, just like in the mock drills. 5, 6. He drew out the fall into the last possible moment. 8, 9, now! He yanked the ripcord. Above his head, a trail of silken silver flowed and billowed until the large emergency chute opened fully to flaunt in the shadows of Mars the reflective glints of its scalloped edge. Suddenly below, he spotted pinpoints of light, the canyon floor, the town's outer court. Expertly, he guided their descent, and after a 2-mile plunge, placed them like a feather only a few yards from the airlock of his goal. Its outline lay countersunk into the rock of the canyon wall, and only the name stamped vividly into the metal could set it apart from the many identical locks that trailed away in either direction. Stumbling through the complex aperture, he was greeted with the reassuring sounds of home. He had passed from death and danger into life and safety within the pause of a few heartbeats. He took a moment to adjust. "There you are," his mother said, unconcerned and apparently unmindful to his breathless condition and the dust that covered his suit and Dove's. Wordlessly, he began to shuck his surface gear while his mother freed the dog from her pet suit. "You're almost late for dinner," she said. "School tomorrow, you know. Have fun at Tommy's sleepover. Anything exciting happen?" She stroked Dove's ears, and the dog yipped excitedly. If only dogs could talk, thought the boy. Not wanting to raise alarm with his mother that would place risk on his future freedom, he shrugged and with a crooked smile replied, "Nah, not really."
Told from the point of view of a 9-year-old girl, our next selection by Asha Falcon investigates the role of secrets in a family going through the arduous journey of divorce and the pressures experienced by 2 siblings who find themselves caught in the middle. Reading Falcon's Playing Outside, please welcome Elizabeth Davis.
Astrid leaned against the kitchen counter, making a bologna sandwich for Hunter, her little brother. She knew he could make it himself, but it made her feel better to be doing something. Hunter grunted in the back of his throat, indicating more mustard. He'd stopped speaking a few weeks ago, choosing instead to oink or bark like a dog. These animal noises gave Astrid twinges of hatred for him, because it was as if he had left her alone with the grown-ups. From outside, she heard her father call her mom a idiot. "You idiot," he said. They were on the porch because Paul no longer set foot in the cabin, not since last winter when he got an apartment in town above his law office. Most of the argument was easy to block out, but cussing always got Astrid's attention. She wasn't allowed to say bad words, even though her parents did. There was something unfair about that. She knew that they were arguing about her dad's new girlfriend who was coming fishing with them over the weekend. Astrid had accidentally mentioned it to her mom when she was packing for the trip because she wanted to bring an extra novel in case Melissa had nothing to read. She thought maybe where the red fern grows. Her mom got so quiet. She said that was their special book, and what did she mean about Melissa being there? Astrid put the book back on the shelf. I was just imagining that she would be there, she said. "Why would you do that to me?" her mom asked. Astrid did not have an answer for that. She sat with her hands in her lap, looking at the splayed suitcase until her mom got up and left the room. She felt guilty, but she liked Melissa. Melissa was a marine biologist, and she studied whales and seals. She told Astrid that whales talk to each other under the water by singing. Her mom had a Judy Collins record with whale songs on it, and sometimes Astrid played it over and over with her ear right up against the speaker until a mysterious homesickness washed over her. Astrid put Hunter's sandwich on a paper plate. A month previously, the water had been turned off, but her mom said they didn't need to use dishes if they stocked up on paper plates and cups. See, she said as she dropped the used plates in the trash. Presto! She said the same thing about the heat. Since they had a fireplace, there was no need to pay for heat, and she said, put on another sweater. Once a week now, they took showers at the pool, and they made a quick stop behind the supermarket on the way home, checking the dumpsters for produce. Her mom said it was just another way for them to save money, and the stuff was fine, barely bruised. She threw it all in a pot and called it dumpster stew. Delicious. But it was really important that her dad didn't know. If he found out, her mom said, he would take them away from her forever. He wouldn't understand. Her mom said dumpster stew was what bohemians ate. Bohemians were artistic and carefree people who dressed like gypsies and listened to folk music and read literature. They were people on an adventure, but it was a secret adventure. It's us against the world, she said, and that includes your father. Hunter took his sandwich then and went outside. Astrid saw him walk over to the swing set and rock back and forth as he ate. He nudged the ashy dirt with the toe of his sneaker. His Superman cape dragged in the dirt behind him. Their parents had moved to the stairs in front of the house. Astrid thought they would stop fighting now that Hunter was outside, but they hadn't noticed him. I don't want that little around my kids, her mom said. She slammed the porch railing with her palm. All right, Rose. She won't be there. It anyhow, Paul said. As he stomped down the stairs, he muttered something else Astrid couldn't make out, his voice absorbed by the wall of spruce surrounding the driveway. The nearest neighbors were a quarter mile through the woods. That's why her parents had bought the cabin, so they could be out in the woods, away from everything. That's what they'd said, so they could live in the real Alaska. Paul's truck backed out of the driveway, and he gunned the motor. Astrid knew her mom would sob for hours in her bedroom, inconsolable until night fell, and the cabin got so cold she finally had to come downstairs and build a fire. They would end up eating crackers and peanut butter again for dinner, because she would be too tired to cook. Astrid ducked out the back door and ran across the porch and tapped Hunter on the shoulder as she passed him on the swing. Tag, you're it, she shouted, and she kept running down the hill, her body pulled forward by the tilt of the yard. Over her shoulder, she saw Hunter spin away from the swing and give chase. She shrieked and ran toward the pond. She pretended that she had no parents, that she was a wild fox living in the woods. The air was water, and she was a seal swimming towards daylight. She kept on until she got to the trail that led around the pond. Then she ducked behind a log so she could jump out and scare Hunter when he caught up with her. But when he didn't come, after a few minutes, she gave up and ran out of the woods back to where he waited at the edge of the driveway. Mom says come in because she wants to talk to us, he said. Well, what about? Astrid asked, even though she knew. Rose wanted to know if Melissa was going to be at the fish camp. She wanted them to spy. We can get pizza, Hunter said. We have to go and get our coats, and she's going to talk to us, and then we can go get pizza and Charlie Chaplin. Pizza was Astrid and Hunter's favorite food. On Fridays, the Captain Kegg's restaurant showed movies on a big screen. Rose got them pitchers of root beer and mushroom and sausage pizza. She says it's special, he said. Then her mom opened the door, her coat on, and her hair brushed. Who wants pizza? She said. It's not even dinner time, said Astrid. It was true. It was the middle of the afternoon. But Rose just said, any time's a good day for pizza, right, Hunter? Hunter nodded and gave out 3 short barks. It was only then that Astrid realized he'd been talking. She hadn't even noticed, and it made her worry that Hunter was talking to her mom in secret. She wondered what he'd already told her. But she wasn't going to tell her mom anything because she didn't even know. She didn't know if her dad lied about Melissa not coming on a fishing trip, but she hoped Melissa would be there. It was her own bad secret. She followed her mom to the car. When Hunter got in the back seat, he oinked as if he hadn't just been talking a few minutes ago. Astrid leaned in the door and hissed in his face. "You're a faker," she said. Hunter stared at her like he didn't know what she meant. Rose started the engine and told Astrid to get in already. Let's go, she said. But Astrid didn't want to go. She stood with her hand on the door. And then she slammed it shut and ran back to the house. She stood inside the door for a minute, and then she heard the car drive away. She ran back outside and yelled that she changed her mind, but they were already gone. By the time they came home hours later, Astrid had gone to bed after putting Where the Red Fern Grows back in her suitcase. The next morning, Rose took them to the harbor. They were going to fly to Larsen Bay by float plane, then take a skiff to Amok Island on the west side of Kodiak. They waited on the dock for the plane to fuel up while Paul joked around with the pilot. He was a criminal defense lawyer and had gotten just about everyone in the island out of trouble at one point or the other. People loved him, or at least loved what he could do for them. But Rose always said Paul was never meant to be a lawyer. What he really wanted to be was a fisherman. But she refused to be married to a fisherman. They stank and they drank too much, and she wasn't going to eat salmon every day of her life. Before they boarded the plane, Rose clutched Hunter and Astrid in painfully tight hugs, telling them she loved them. She would see them on Sunday. Be careful, be good. Oh, she loved them so much. She acted like Paul was a total stranger, and in some way it began to seem that way to Astrid. She had second thoughts about going, wanting to change her mind. There was no doing that. That was not allowed. As they flew away from the dock, she saw her mom's car down in the parking lot, and for a second, Astrid wished the plane would crash. But then she clenched her eyes shut, pushed the image away. She knew how bad thoughts could make things happen if you weren't careful. "Idiot," she whispered. She pressed her forehead to the window. The mountains passed just under the plane, yellow grass on their sides, shearing in the wind. When they got to Larsen Bay, they stopped in the general store to pick up supplies. Everyone seemed to know Paul and said hello and what beautiful kids. Hunter had been quiet since they left town, his devotion to Rose made clear by his stiff movements and refusal to make eye contact. Astrid decided to pretend she didn't notice, but a weight pressed on her. It made her tired. She was non-committal when Paul asked her which flavor of pop she would prefer, even though they weren't allowed to have soda at home. She didn't care if they got hot dogs or hamburgers until she heard the frustration in her dad's voice. "Hot dogs," she finally said. She wanted to tell him, "Don't put all the pressure on me. Make Hunter pick something." She wanted to kick Hunter hard in the shin. The desire to kick him was like a pressure in her chest, running down her arms and legs. Finally, they loaded up the skiff and headed out. Once underway, the wind in their faces and the roar of the engine made talking difficult. Astrid watched for porpoise, which sometimes swam so close she could skim their silky backs with their hands. Hunter kept his arms crossed tightly over his chest with his hands tucked in his armpits. He wore a bright yellow jacket and a red wool cap because Rose had packed all the children's brightest clothes, afraid they would get lost and a bear would find them before Paul did. Astrid wore an orange rain slicker that made her look like a traffic cone. Every summer, someone got mauled on the west side of the island. A Kodiak could take your arm off with one swipe, knock your eyeball out so it hung by a string. They had brought pepper spray, guns, and a bullhorn, all in case of bears. Her dad said to swim out in the water and a bear wouldn't follow you. He said there probably wouldn't be that many bears this early in the summer anyhow. The pepper spray was just a precaution, being on the safe side. "Don't worry," he said. But Astrid didn't trust the blank alder thickets that edged the beaches. Dark holes opened into the woods where the bears hunted, their enormous shoulders scraping the trees. The skiff turned into a cove where the cabin sat a few yards back into the beach rye, below a stand of alder. It seemed to grow out of the woods, its sides pale as the tree bark. The beach curved away under cliffs covered in dense brush. Paul nosed the skiff forward onto the rocks until the prow was secured, then stood as if he was listening for something. Astrid listened too. It was quiet after the roar of the motor, and her mind was blank and thick. She climbed out of the skiff and helped Hunter, who oinked in the back of his throat and surveyed the beach. Within seconds, a swarm of no-see-ums fell around their heads. Then the cabin door opened, and Melissa stepped onto the porch, pulling on a blue rain slicker. Melissa! Paul tied the bow line to a log and unloaded the skiff as if he hadn't even seen her. Thank you.
In our next piece by Mariah Warren, we explore Wanderlust. Originally called Found in Transit, this piece has a new name with an interesting backstory worth sharing. This story is the only surviving bit of writing that sunk with a fishing boat Mariah worked on. A diver discovered the rusty thumb drive months after the incident, right before the wreckage site was deemed too dangerous for further salvage. Due to this history, Mariah renamed the work. Reading The Piece That Wasn't Lost, please welcome Christina Apathy.
As daylight fades in the raggedly cloudy west, we're running south before a massive following sea. Out beyond crab pot lines, we'll charge through the night in pursuit of better fishing grounds. I'm perched in front of the nav computer, feet braced on the pilot's seat across the way. 1 year ago today, I was standing watch on the schooner Haley and Matthew, sailing down to Haiti. A full year I've spent with those stories rolling over in my mind, woven through my dreams and alive in moments of staring into the dark, waiting for sleep. I know they need escape, to condense out of the fog and find words. So many times in the past year I've thought, as soon as I find the time, as soon as this trip's over, how could I have foreseen how the trolling season would transition without pause to the albacore season, to the dive season, to Europe, to Indonesia, then back to boat work and trolling once again? Tonight I'm in a pensive mood. Here in this tiny, warm oasis of life, lit only by the glow of a half-dozen screens, my mind drifts to the wanderers. How did this become reality? Can any of you out there tell me? It's as if somewhere along the way, the periods of planning kept contracting until the journey became a way of life. Does any one of you remember when you last recognized the smell of home? Or which trip it was that you never really unpacked from? Five weeks ago, in a restaurant in Ubud, Bali, Dustin hoisted a glass of arak and proposed a toast to living out of the bag. And we laughed, understanding, and fell into our respective, reflective moments of silence. Dustin Scott and I, Team Equity, reunited for a dive trip of a different sort, converged on Indonesia from far-flung corners. I flew through a day and night from London, unpacked the gear and detritus of a North Sea voyage into a box in a friend's car, and boarded another plane headed west. Scotty V, last diver standing, coiled up his dive hose and charged south from the Alaska geoduck grounds. He tied up the fishing vessel Equity in Bellingham and flew out of Seattle. And Dustin, well, he's just a roaming tumbleweed. He was getting situated for a pleasant winter in Thailand, but followed tips and hunches to surprise us on the dock as we transited between dive sites. When we parted ways in Bali a week later, he was jetting off to Fiji to crew on a catamaran delivery to Spain. Tonight I am thinking of my loved ones, the family and friends who create a framework for my journeys. Without you, I would have no from or to. I would be on a raft, adrift in treacherous seas, with no star to take a fix on. I'm thinking of the loving arms of my relatives, the open doors and hearts when prevailing winds set me down at your door. And my dearest friends, you ask of me, when will I be passing through? And I know you know that I probably have no idea, but you keep asking anyway. And I love you for that. The next tack in my voyage may bring me to your town, and when it does, oh, the times we'll have. You'll want to hear the stories, tales of mishaps and close calls, and the occasional raging success. And we'll have your own to share as well, and never a complaint at the short notice, the last-minute phone call, the 3 a.m. arrival. These relationships are the vessels to hold my fluid life. They comprise the indescribable joy of being underway, suspended in time and space between people who love me, like a little kid jumping and swinging between two adults, or tossed into the air and caught time and again. Running at night is running on faith, trusting in the GPS system to be accurate, the compass to read true. Blackness unfolds the rushing vessel, pressing in at every window pane and sliding under the cabin door with soft breaths. Heather sleeps soundly in her narrow bunk behind my seat, trusting that I will pilot us through the night, the 2 skipper keys nestled at her feet, blissed out and snoozing. I know they believe with all their little doggy hearts that Heather will keep them safe. She is the center of their universe. Must not every pitch and heave of this tiny world be at her command? I glance at this sleepy pile of life each time the watch alarm flashes, then scan the nav computer and the radar screen for any hint of danger. I interrogate those devices. Would you lie to me, little flashing bundle of electrodes? Would you lead us into peril? Would you care if we died? I do love this state of being on the move, inhabiting a vessel underway. I can shift within my carapace, dampering the stove or opening the back door to stare into the rushing blackness, scanning for any lights. But below and within, thrumming through the soles of my feet, the whirling mass of diesel and steel drives us ever onward. Even running blind, the boat's progress is obvious. The internal inertia presses inexorably through my chest. It feels as if our movement, our onward dash toward the coming day, is sending all the blood in my body back to flood my heart. Standing in one place, the world spins by too quickly. Gazing through the same unchanging window, I feel trapped in a time-lapse video. I am the unmoving frozen constant, the stone fence standing by as crocuses thrust forth into the sun and burst and wither away. Can you understand this, any of you? Do you watch a stream or a river rush by, gleefully headlong, headed for parts unknown, and long desperately to dash after? Time sweeps on, cloaked in raiment of sunshine and water, and I reach spasmodically after. A parting flick of her hem laces my lashes with spray, and I try to catch the shining droplets as they roll down my cheek. I used to imagine that writing required some degree of solitude and stability. Perhaps a desk, a quiet room, a certain frame of mind. I've pictured too many times that special place where one can be alone, where we can be alone someday, my muse and I. But the days exist to saunter by, they do. I just can't sit. I can't even stand and wave beside the pier as the ship of life casts off her lines. No subtle muse, with your coy and fickle ways, not even with your hand in mine. as the gaps between adventures continuously contract, committing me ever more to a nomadic life. Perhaps this vital form of synthesis may be the friend I yank from the crevasse before it crushes shut. I am that mountaineer, trying to haul every necessity on my back. I am the walrus, padded with rolling layers of energy to protect me from the cold depths. Big, gnarly fangs, too, not to be crossed. Like a snorkeler, learning to scuba dive. I'm beginning to believe that all I really need, I can bring with me. I sink through layers of increasing pressure, cradled in the tightening grip of the sea. I carry the means, the oxygen, the key to life, no longer forced to strive toward the surface, glancing back at aquatic mysteries left unexplored. Forgetting the old rules of equilibrium, I take a first, exploratory breath. Tap a key, breathe out. I open my eyes, and a whole new world unfolds. Thank you.
Well, that's all the time we have for this evening. Let's hear it again for our performers. And our writers, will you please stand? Please. Thank you. Bobbi McCutcheon, Asha Falcon, and Mariah Warren. Thank you so much. Oh, and also thank you to Kevin Myers, who couldn't be here tonight. Thank you, audience. We couldn't do it without you. And let's see, what else do I have to say? And thank you for watching Arts at 360's Writer Showcase. For more information on our writers and on our actors, or to rewatch this program, and to learn how to submit to Writer Showcase, please go to 360north.org. Good night.
Funding for all Arts at 360 programs comes from Alaska Airlines, Fjord Flying Service, and the McDowell Group.